and gentlemen, welcome to the Community Connection. There are times and places in the universe where everything comes together and we get to have a conversation with some of the most outstanding educators in the world. We've got Mike Schmoker, Dr. Schmoker from Arizona. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing, my man?
Just great. Thank you, Nathan. Great to be here.
Thank you. We've got a tight show, tight episode that's going to revolutionize education, possibly worldwide. 50-50 chance, but I think we can pull it off, Dr. Schmoker. I think we can pull it off. Absolutely.
We'll do our best.
So, all right. So we're just gonna bounce right in this, man. Listen, you've been a consistent advocate for educators to focus on the right work. And I think we all think we've been focusing on the right work, right? But I think that there's something unique about the craft and the alchemy of education where we can get a little lost in the weeds sometime, or a little myopically focused, but sometimes not myopically focused on. It's just all this stuff that's coming in with education. I think education might be the most researched field there is, it seems like. And we're all trying to do the best we can for kids. And Dr. Schmoker, we're getting some things right, but I think we keep getting some things wrong. So I'm going to hit you with this hard question. What do we got to keep doing? What do we got to start doing? And what do we got to stop doing?
Well, it might be easier for me just to say that the things we need to start doing, and in some cases, these things are already happening in some places, nowhere near enough, are the three things I write about all the time. There's nothing the least bit original about these three things. One of them is we need to get curriculum in place. I mean, it stands to reason that you're going to get a way better quality of education if teachers know what to teach and the stuff they're teaching has been curated. You know, it was carefully selected, laid out on a schedule of, I love Linda Darling Hammond's expression, on a schedule of what to teach and when. The moment you do that, I love to tell stories about what happens when you get a curriculum in place. Within a school year, you have very, very good odds of seeing not just gains, but significant ones. I could tell you a few. I'll tell you Kim Marshall, who writes the Marshall Memo you may be familiar with.
Yes, right.
He is one of the brightest, hardworking guys I've ever known. And he spent 9 years trying all kinds of things, like you mentioned a moment ago, all these different innovations and things. None of them paid off until, lo and behold, he grabs hold of the old stodgy curriculum as being the main thing he's going to focus on. He has every teacher in teams, of course, teacher teams, build a curriculum. At the end of 1 year, his school, which was in the lowest third achievement-wise in Boston public schools, goes from the bottom third to the top third in 1 year. And then got better and better with each subsequent year. That one thing had that kind of profound difference. The other two things, and I could tell equally compelling stories about them, is the moment you introduce vastly more real literacy. And by that, I just mean way more reading, purposeful reading. Reading and discussion about what you read and writing about what you read, even crudely doing those things, pays off, I think, within days, much less within a school year. And the third
statement, I like it. Yep.
Well, and the third thing, you could say the same thing about it. That I would suggest that you have excellent odds of seeing measurable, even significant improvement the day you implement certain kinds of structured lessons. By that I only mean lessons where you, and I will concede that this basic structure doesn't apply to every lesson, and it does not preclude independent projects and assignments where students are left to do more of the work on their own. Would not preclude that for a second. But most of the time, when you're introducing new material, if you show students what they should be doing, modeling, we call that, thinking aloud, followed immediately by rapid fire segments of students practicing while you check for understanding, those three magical words, and reteach as needed with each step where you see students struggling, just that. The very day you implement that kind of structure, you're probably going to see better results.
Mm.
especially if, as I encourage more and more of my clients to do, literally calculate how many of your students learned or met expectations for that particular lesson the day that you implemented it. It
Mm.
would be a pleasant surprise to see how, those results that you'll get will be inspiring.
Mike, you just
That's the
talked
Holy
about,
Trinity. That's the Holy Trinity right
Yeah,
there.
it's
Yeah.
hard not to think so.
Mm.
you just talked about things that could work. I want to do a quick lightning round with you of things that might not.
Okay.
So the question is there any research evidence for the following topics? And you can give me a yes, no, or maybe jury's still out on it.
Sure. I'll do my best.
All right.
All right.
Number one, literacy blocks based on center-based learning.
No.
Students sitting.
You prefer I not expound on these at these points.
I think we'll come back. We'll come back.
Fire away, Eric. Sorry.
No problem. Students sitting together clustered in groups.
Sometimes.
Okay. Grit.
Not much that I know of. Pretty weak.
Growth mindset.
Same thing.
Differentiation.
One of the most flabbergastingly ineffective, unproven innovations out there.
And learning.
Well, that too requires some qualification, but keep going.
Learning styles.
Well, goodness. No, of course not.
That's my list. And obviously I did pull those from Results Now, the great, phenomenal book. Results Now 2.0, a little bit blurry there.
Well, thank you.
So everything you just said, Mike, I think would be controversial and extremely surprising to many people.
Sure. Sure.
Why do you think, and you're so passionate and you've been passionate about those things. There's a quote I think you mentioned here from Willingham and someone else whose name escapes me, but it's that in education we still don't wash our hands. I love that quote. That's up in a board in my office.
Yeah.
Why?
Well,
Why don't
there's quite a few reasons. You guys know some of these too. For instance, if you just keep aiming a fire hose of innovations at people all the time, it's darn hard to just pause long enough to sort out what's effective as opposed to what isn't. Another reason is anything that's new. We're sort of trapped in this mindset in education where if it's new, it must be better. And if it's new and it's getting a lot of talk, like AI right now, AI gets vastly more talk right now than an awful lot of the most fundamental, much needed, really potentially transformative actions we could take. And yet AI and innumerable tech-based innovations are getting all the attention. And you got to just realize too, I think, as an educator, that our ed schools simply do not impart with any sense of priority. Look, prospective teachers, prospective educators, here are a few things that have a profound and virtually immediate impact. Here's the case for them. Here's the research that supports them. Here are real schools that demonstrate that these things don't just work, they work dramatically if you are really faithful to them. Our ed schools and our PD do a very, very inadequate job of those things. They do all kinds of stuff, and they talk up and discuss all kinds of different kinds of fine-grained research, or, forgive me, well-intentioned stuff like even grit, growth mindset, differentiated instruction, without pausing long enough to say, now, hold on, do those deserve priority? Do they have a research base, a real research base, not just, oh, I read a study that seems to support one element of differentiated instruction. If I may just digress, differentiated instruction's entire research base, there is none, is entirely based on research that has no direct links to differentiated instructional classrooms. It's all very indirect, very, very flimsy stuff, but it sounds good. We love sentimentally attached to the notion that all of us are different. All kids are different. And if we can just find the right, perfect set of skills and modes of teaching and learning style, well, that's going to take us, that's the yellow brick road. And it's so plainly not, and there's no evidence for it, but we pursue these things because on the surface, they're attractive.
Yeah.
And we never stop long enough to say, time out. What works the best? Are we doing it? And if we aren't, let's do it, because that would have the most profound impact on kids.
We live in Kansas, but want to be in Oz.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
You like
Oz was a little,
I was a
it
little
was,
wonky.
it was colorful.
after all.
A little bit wicked, right? I think you likened it. It's ideology versus evidence.
That's as good a way to put it as I can think of. You bet.
That's because that's how you put it.
Oh, okay. Wow, gee, gosh.
So but yes, I agree with the Schmoker.
So let's get a couple of these finer points, Mike. Because that's fascinating, right? Because as a 30-year, almost close to 30-year educator, in some way, whether I was a teacher, leader, or superintendent, or even instructional coach, all these things that Eric has talked about has been part of our practice. Right. So, like, the differentiated instruction is a big one. So let me ask a finer point question for this one, because is it that differentiated instruction, it fails because of the implementation or the strategy?
It's the strategy itself. Now, you always have to qualify this. The best teachers I've ever seen do not differentiate. In fact, I've come across an awful lot of highly effective schools, districts, teachers, teams of teachers. Not one, I'll say that again, not one of them sorted kids or tried to make separate lessons or brought different, separate, customized approaches to teaching small groups or individual kids. None of them, which makes sense because there's literally zero research for that approach. There's, of course, the fact that it burdens the teacher overwhelmingly. But that doesn't mean, and some people will use the word differentiate, maybe in an innocent enough way to say, well, if I've got a student who really is so far behind that they need a little extra help, I'm going to make occasion for that kid to get the help that they need. Or there really are times when some students come in with limited language proficiency, and they really do need something different than, say, the other 90 or 95% of the students. And we're probably going to allot a little more tutorial time to certain students who struggle than others. But that's not differentiated instruction. We may use that word and say, well, I differentiate because Eric's really behind in this, and at the end of class, I like to spend a little more time, et cetera. But that's not differentiated instruction, literally, because I've just done a really close study of it. Its architect and architects are advocating for us to look for 8 different characteristics, including learning styles, by which we then customize instruction for each kid. Number one. Number two, they don't only recommend, they denigrate and ridicule whole class instruction. You almost have to read this stuff twice in the literature by the most prominent architect of differentiated instruction, when that person says students cannot learn in whole class instruction, and then has all these very unfounded reasons claiming to substantiate that. And I just want to say, well, gosh, how did my wife's math department make the largest gains in the state of Arizona when not one of them differentiated? How did the 2 teachers I know at Lacima Middle School, who just decided we're just going to throw out, the typical district curriculum, and instead we're going to have kids read, discuss, and write in English and social studies and do nothing but. And they rose from the middle of the pack to a 3-way tie in the state of Arizona for 8th grade, by the way. They did no differentiation. I just want to say to this person and anyone who pushes hard on that notion that differentiation is essential, whole class instruction is ineffective, I want to say, how can you argue against a mountain of evidence plus all of these schools that demonstrate the effectiveness of approaches that run exactly counter to what you're recommending people to do?
Yeah, that's a fascinating, almost like you can see like where educators would be faced with cognitive dissonance, trying to almost like figure that out, where it's just like, well, I've been doing something for so long and I've been quote unquote impactful. But if I'm not doing that, maybe there's something wrong with me, or so you know what I mean? So there's some
Nathan,
cognitive dissonance.
Nathaniel, it's funny you say that, because there was an article in Ed Week advocating for differentiated instruction, and they said, here are really highly effective differentiated instruction teachers. And every one of them, you can tell they're sincere, hardworking devotees. And every one of their little entries, they all say two things come out. They make no claim for getting better results. Number two, they express their deep frustration with the fact that they are mere mortals. That's literally the word. And they realize they really can't pull this off. And their frustration, going back to your comment, is palpable. And you just want to say, look what it's done to these people. And these are supposed to be exemplars.
Yeah.
No results, lots of frustration, and an admission that mere mortals simply can't do this stuff.
There is one more aspect to differentiation that I hear a lot in my travels. I'm in schools across America, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, private, public, whatever. And I hear this a lot. And sometimes I try to, when I hear about culturally responsive instruction, it often falls in the same hemisphere of differentiation, where I've got kids from 40 different countries in my classroom, and we have the standard, and I need to bring the standard to life and this curriculum to life for the 40 different languages and ethnicities and backgrounds and experiences that I have. And that's how I differentiate, because I want to be able to make this purposeful and meaningful for these students that are so heterogeneous, like from all over the place. And I want to differentiate my instruction. I see where the heart is for that, but does the research and evidence back up the effort?
I certainly don't know of any that does. And again, you have to step lightly on something like cultural response. Be like, well, sure, who doesn't want to be culturally aware and sensitive, of course.
Right.
So right off the bat, we have to realize we do need to widen the scope of the kinds of literature that students read, and be careful not to lurch too far in one direction or another. We ought to sustain a focus on solid quality literature, even if in fact it's been taught for the last several decades. But we have to and should be introducing new kinds of literature from different cultures. But I hear something like culturally responsive teaching. I look at professors who advocate for it, even in my own local universities.
Sure.
And what I see is one more massive distraction from what literacy ought to be. If you focus only on these hot button issues like this, you never get around to realizing the real problem is kids read, even in English class and social studies, where hours of reading ought to be occurring almost every day. Reading, writing, and discussion ought to be occurring all the time in those classes. And they're not.
They're not.
Minutes per day. Writing and writing instruction, weeks go by and kids do almost no purposeful, meaningful reading. And discussion, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how rarely I walk into a class and see a legitimate discussion about a text where the students had time to read it carefully, underline and annotate, maybe pair up and talk to a partner, and now they're ready to participate in a discussion where they really get to articulate and listen to their friends and peers' ideas and thoughts, and become more articulate and more thoughtful and more wise, because they're, again, go back to lots of reading, writing, and discussion. That's the main issue. We still haven't gotten that in the area of literacy.
And they can do that either in rows or in groups, right? I just want to make sure.
Sure, absolutely. I'm a big fan of rows. I'm with Doug Lemov. I love rows. But you can deviate from that whenever you think it's advantageous. Of course, you separate them for small group work, which again, I would say, you never want to say small group work is wholly ineffective. It's quite effective for lots of things, but we do, and my audiences agree with me on this, we probably do too darn much of it. And we really ought to acknowledge, and there's actually research on this by people like David Berliner. If you want to have cooperative learning and students articulating and learning from each other, the best way to go is with pair share.
Mm-hmm.
And my audiences, when I give them a chance to think about that, they say, well, obviously, there's way more accountability. You're listening harder because you know you have to respond to that person. You can't just lie back and engage in what
Yep.
one researcher called social loafing. But anyway,
That's what I do. Social loafing all the time.
boy, yeah, I think it's what
I'm
we're
quite
doing
good
right
at
now.
it.
That goes back to another point I didn't make in my lightning round list, but raising your hand to be called on, that would also be a no. Correct, Mike?
Oh yeah, yeah, and there's this again. There's this
No.
really unfortunate but ubiquitous practice I never heard an ed professor say, and maybe they do. I hope so. Look their prospective teachers and administrators in the eyes and say, please, please use hand raising in very limited ways. We're almost encouraging kids to know they can go to school and spend 5 or 6 hours and just get that C plus or B in a class just by being there, while being completely disengaged.
Yep. I appreciate that you talk in your books about when you are engaged in authentic literature and having those discussions, that is deep, it's rich, it's engaging. Students appreciate that.
They do.
Versus the Crayola curriculum, which you mentioned, and just coloring things in and gluing and stapling and pasting and maybe making a TikTok.
Yep.
So I just appreciate your advocacy for the deep embedment in authentic literature instead of doing just kind of dumb stuff.
No, I have my hand raised.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Eric. And if Nathaniel would just stop raising his hand, he's always that kid. I know. Okay, Nathaniel.
Even if I didn't know the answer, my ass is raising my hand. Just
Mike, it's every week. Mike.
I guess he's
every week.
He's giving us he's throwing some affirmation our way. Maybe.
Oh no, I love it. No, man. I mean, which kids have the right to be engaged, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like we want 100% engagement 100% of the time. So, it's interesting, Mike, reading your stuff and like being in classrooms and like being a student of yours, and I just want to make sure our listeners understand what a couple of these terms mean. So I got two that I want with our time to really define, because I think it's important, because it can be a little abstract and vague for people. The first thing is curriculum. There's a lot of different terms for curriculum. On one hand, it's the $1 million curriculum that we bought from Houghton Mifflin or Pearson or whatever the products are. And then we put those in front of our kids and say, teach this with fidelity. The other idea of curriculum is more standards focused, state standards focused, and we're going to call that. There's the term guaranteed and viable curriculum. Is it guaranteed for all students and viable that we can actually teach it? So for our listeners, what does curriculum mean for Dr. Mike Schmoker?
Well, and I'm gonna riff on Bob Marzano's nice term, guaranteed and viable. The viable just means some entity, even if it's just a garden variety team of teachers, if they look at, say, state standards, and they say, these are the ones that are the most important, those are the ones we really need to teach. And if we do even the most rough calculation, and I encourage people to do these rough calculations in 20 minutes, try to add up about how much time it would take to teach, say, all the standards.
Yep.
And then see if it comes to more than about 150 instructional days, and that's really all you got. You don't got 180. You got maybe
right.
If it comes to more than that, you have to focus then on the ones that are your hills to die on. So you do that, and then you lay them out. And this is what ensures that they're guaranteed and not just viable. They become viable because you've reduced them to a number that can be taught viably within a given time, 150 school days. So the guaranteed portion has to do with laying them out in a defensible sequence by grading period. And once it's in place, and you're always going to be refining it, of course, always and forever. Once it's in place, the other part that makes it guaranteed is that someone in the building, whether it's an instructional coach or an administrator, is walking through classrooms often enough, periodically. It doesn't require that much time, just to make sure that document is being honored.
Yeah.
That's curriculum in my book. I could add an awful lot more detail to that. But wherever I've seen that kind of curriculum, and I got to add, if it is infused with liberal amounts of reading and writing and discussion, it's not a curriculum until those three things abound. Obviously, it's not going to abound as much in choral music as it is in English. We know that.
Sure.
But as long as you got the basic elements you're going to teach, people know what to teach each week, more or less. Not each day. That's ridiculous. But say by week, give or take. And there's plenty of reading, writing, and discussion going on. You got yourself a good curriculum, and then it's got to be monitored. The only qualification I have to add is that you got to be so careful with standards. I don't know if we have time to go into too much detail. When people you got to be so careful with standards in English language arts. It is a separate category. When you look at the standards for English language arts, and then you go to turn those into what you actually teach, you're in trouble. That's where you get this obsession with skills, standards, and test prep. The best schools I know, I hope, can I get away with this?
Yeah.
They pretty much ignore 90% of what's in a ELA standards document. Everyone from E.D. Hirsch, every educator I have any respect for will basically say those standards, they reduce literacy to something that it's not. English language arts curriculum, it's the substance of it needs primarily to be the documents, texts, poems, novels, short stories that you're going to read each week, grading period, what have you. And there's lots of reading, writing, and discussion going on in those classes. If you do that, you are mimicking the most successful schools in the land, which turn out kids who can speak and write and read highly effectively.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
Long answer to a short
No,
question.
it was great.
Very important.
And I just think that people need to understand what that means. And then I wanted, with some of our last minute, the term authentic is very subjective. What's authentic to me may not be objective to, or authentic to Dr. Worcester. So if I'm a language arts teacher and I'm hearing this podcast and I'm like, what does authentic mean? Does it mean a passage that I'm having my kids read to test prep for their end of year test?
No.
Or does it mean the grapes of wrath?
No.
You know, help me out here. What does that mean?
The hand was up.
Well,
hand was up.
I say authentic because anytime you use a word, it's a guess.
Right.
You know, you hope that when you say authentic, it gets people's attention and they're thinking, authentic, what would that mean? And then I do my best, at least in my books and articles, I guess, just to define that, to say authentic. And I'm almost asking my reader to agree with me. Don't you think authentic literacy comes down to, don't we know upon inspection or reflection, it comes down to the ability to read effectively, analytically, for meaning. Don't we know that being literate, authentically literate, is being articulate and able to write effectively and persuasively? Seems to me authentic's a pretty decent word to use for that. But I will accept your suggestion that for some people they'll hear authentic and think, oh, well, that's what I'm doing, and it's not authentic at all.
Right.
Mike, can I ask you a quick question? I know we are wrapping up, but
sure.
So you mentioned Doug Lemov. Who else do you follow? Like, who else should people listen to? Who are important voices right now, besides you, of course, in education?
Well, you got to give it to Emily Hanford, who wrote, who wrote and did those podcasts.
Told the story.
Right.
Sold a story.
Sold a story. You got to give people like her credit. I don't know a lot about her, but I know that she did an awful lot to bring.
Yes.
Again, you can. I'm glad I have a chance to say you can overdo phonics. You can.
Sure.
I'm with Emily Hanford. I'm with Seidenberg. I can't remember. Eric.
Yep. Mark Seidenberg.
Mark, thank you. Yep. He's somebody who's really worth reading.
Yep.
And it's really worth reading on his critique of most of what gets taught and recommended in our ed schools, which isn't always what students and teachers need. Thirdly, I got to go with Tim Shanahan, Daniel Willingham, Tim Shanahan on literacy. Doug Lamov, of course, when we mentioned. Real good people to follow. You bet.
That's outstanding. Mike Schmoker, you have your work should be in the hands of every school board member, every superintendent, every school board or school secretary of education. I don't know why aren't you the secretary of education, Mike? Come on, you got to get more political. Come on, man.
Mike.
Come on, Mike. We need you.
Here's why. Here's why. Of course, it was offered to me. You guys.
Yes, we figured.
That's right.
But I have two new 4-month-old granddaughters.
Congratulations.
10 minutes away, and oh my gosh, I'm just too busy. So
I hear you. But you know what I want? I'm going to challenge you though, Mike. Your granddaughters need to have the type of education that they deserve. And it should not matter what school or what state or which classroom that they're in. They need to be doing those three things. And so you may not be at the Voice, but we're gonna promote your voice, brother, on this show. That's why this community connection is going to change the world. I guarantee it.
Thank you, Nathaniel and Eric. You guys, you're great. This was wonderful. Thanks so much.